Picture walking into one of the grandest homes ever built. Huge golden rooms, shiny lights hanging from the ceiling, and more fancy fabric than you could ever imagine. But the moment you take a big breath, a terrible smell hits your nose, so strong it could make flowers die from far away. This was life inside the Palace of Versailles in the 1600s. It looked beautiful on the outside, but inside, things were not so lovely. Rich women, dressed in jewels and expensive clothes, lived in a world full of dirt and stink. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below, and please like the video. Thank you. Today we're taking a thankfully imaginary journey into how rough life was for noble women when it came to staying clean during this time. What you're about to hear may surprise you. It's the top 5 worst hygiene habits among royal ladies in France. And they're far from pretty that if you were a noble woman in 17th century France, you were expected to smile politely, walk gracefully, and dress perfectly. But personal cleanliness? That was a different story. Taking a bath, something we now see as important, was often seen as risky or even dangerous. Back then, doctors believed warm water could make you sick instead of clean. Strange as it sounds, avoiding water was seen as the healthier choice. People back then believed that taking a warm bath could actually make you sick. They thought hot water opened up your skin and let in dangerous things from the air. On top of that, the church didn't help. Many religious leaders said bathing was sinful, full of pride and temptation. So over time, people, especially women, stopped using water to stay clean. Most noble ladies didn't have private bathrooms or anything close to a daily shower. In truth, they hardly ever washed their whole bodies. Bathing was seen as risky, pointless, or even wrong. Instead of getting in water, women would lightly wipe their faces, hands, and maybe their necks with a cloth. But these cloths weren't soaked in water. They were dampened with things like vinegar, alcohol, or even spit, which were believed to clean the skin without making it too wet. And when a real bath finally did happen, which wasn't often, it wasn't a nice, private moment. It was a family affair. Everyone used the same tub, one after the other. And who got to go first? The men, of course. By the time a woman stepped in, the water was dirty, cloudy, and only slightly warm. And that's if there was even any clean water left in the tub. Often there wasn't. As for the smell throughout the palace, it didn't stay near the stables. Guests visiting Versailles often mentioned the strong, unpleasant odor floating through the grand halls. It was a mix of old perfume, sweat, grease from animal products, and dampness from mold. It's not that royalty didn't care about how they looked. They cared a lot. But their idea of clean was very different from ours, especially for women. Ladies were supposed to be the picture of elegance and beauty. So they wore shiny gowns, loads of jewels, and thick face powder. But underneath all that, skin that hadn't felt soap or water in months. They looked perfect from far away, but if you got too close, it was a very different story. Now, if skipping baths wasn't shocking enough, the next habit, or lack of it, might surprise you even more. Toilets. You'd think a palace as grand as Versailles, home to kings and queens, would be filled with fancy bathrooms. But no, out of the hundreds of rooms and countless guests, there were hardly any real toilets at all. Instead, people used chamber pots, small bowls kept under beds or hidden behind curtains. When someone needed to go, they'd use the pot, and afterwards someone, hopefully not you, would throw the waste out the window. If the timing or weather was bad, someone walking by could end up with a disgusting surprise. And believe it or not, some men didn't even bother with pots. They simply did their business on balconies or in corners of the palace. Even the palace gardens weren't safe. People often relieved themselves right there among the flowers. Visitors from other countries were shocked by what they saw. And this wasn't just the odd accident. It was a regular part of life at Versailles. The smell was so bad and so constant that the palace became famous for its foul odor. Some hallways were even used like toilets. Imagine being a noble woman, dressed in layers of fine fabric, slowly walking through the grand halls, not just to show off your gown, but to make sure you didn't step in something disgusting. It got so bad that in 1715, the king had to issue a rule. The palace halls had to be cleaned once a week. Not every day, once a week. And that was seen as progress. Now, let's talk about something we take for granted: wiping. Back then, toilet paper didn't exist. People used whatever they could find: old cloth, straw, leaves, or in the worst case, their bare hands. Washing up after? Rare. And when people were tossing waste out of windows and cleaning themselves poorly, it's no surprise that diseases and bugs spread quickly. Still, Versailles was the center of royal style. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the hairstyles of noble women. These weren't simple hairdos. They were like works of art. Some styles were so tall, they reached over a foot high. Women decorated their hair with pearls, lace, flowers, and even tiny models of gardens or ships. Yes, realistic little ships sat on top of powdered hair, sailing across a sea of curls. To make these sky-high hairstyles, women packed their hair with all kinds of materials: wire frames, horsehair, wool, or cotton padding to build up the shape. Once the structure was in place, they slathered on pomade made mostly from animal fat, especially beef fat. This greasy mixture helped hold everything together, but it also attracted lice like a magnet. Since women rarely washed their hair and almost never took off their wigs for cleaning, lice didn't just show up, they moved in and multiplied. Lice were so common that women carried special tools, long-handled silver combs called lice claws, to scratch their heads without messing up their hair. These tools were fancy and decorative, and it wasn't unusual to see a lady casually scratching her scalp at a party while sipping wine, trying not to disturb her towering hairdo. Still, no one dared skip the fashion trends. In the strict social world of the royal court, how you looked meant everything. If you didn't keep up with the latest style or looked poorly put together, you could lose respect and even your place at court. So even if your scalp was full of lice and your wig smelled like old grease, you kept up appearances. And these wigs weren't just dirty and uncomfortable. They could also be dangerous. Some were so large and heavy that some of those wigs were so heavy they caused constant neck pain. Others even caught fire from candles placed too close. Still, noble women wore them proudly, because looking fashionable was part of keeping their place at court. Poor women didn't deal with any of that. They simply shaved their heads to avoid lice altogether. But for noble ladies, their hair was a symbol of beauty and status, even if it hid an entire insect colony underneath. Now let's move on to something that should have been pleasant: food. Royal feasts were famous for their size and luxury. Tables overflowed with roasted birds, meat pies, sweet pastries, and candied fruits. But beneath the surface, there was a stomach-turning truth. The kitchens had major hygiene problems too. The palace had terrible plumbing. Sometimes sewage would actually flow back into the kitchen areas. There's even a report of wastewater reaching Queen Marie Antoinette's private kitchen. With no proper refrigeration, poor airflow, and almost no waste removal, keeping food safe was nearly impossible. Meat spoiled quickly, fruits and vegetables sat out for days, and rats and bugs roamed freely. Yet the royal chefs had to keep cooking and serving meals. No matter how unsafe they might be, yes, you might guess, stomach problems were common. People suffered from diarrhea, vomiting, and infections. But the worst of all were the parasites. Many members of the royal court were infected with worms, especially tapeworms, caused by dirty kitchens and undercooked meat. Even King Louis XIV wasn't spared. He reportedly passed a 6-inch-long tapeworm. A harsh reminder that no one, not even the king, was safe from the dangers of palace living. Poor hygiene didn't just affect what people ate. It impacted their daily lives in every way. For noble women, even mealtime was a performance. They had to smile, chat, sip wine, and look elegant while eating. But behind the polished manners, many were quietly suffering from stomach pain, nausea, or worse. Still, they kept it hidden to protect their image. Now let's talk about one of the most private and difficult moments in a woman's life: childbirth. For royal women, giving birth wasn't just painful, it was a public event. In 17th century France, when a queen or a high-ranking noblewoman went into labor, the birth wasn't kept private. It was treated like a national ceremony. The delivery room would be packed with people: doctors, priests, nobles, and courtiers, all standing by to watch. Not to help, just to observe. When Queen Marie Therese gave birth, there were so many people in the room, it looked more like a theater than a place to give birth. Why all the attention? Because royal births had to be witnessed to prevent any rumors or scandals. People were afraid that if no one was watching, a baby who was stillborn or a girl might be secretly replaced with a healthy male heir. So the entire process had to be seen by others. This meant that, while the mother was in terrible pain and completely vulnerable, she had to go through labor in front of a crowd. For the royal women of France, life was a strange mix of luxury and suffering. They wore silk gowns and glittering jewels, lived in golden palaces, and dined at grand feasts. Yet they rarely bathed, battled lice in their hair, stepped around filth in the halls, and gave birth in front of an audience. Behind every powdered face and perfect hairstyle was a story of discomfort, illness, and quiet endurance. It's easy to admire the beauty of the past, but when we look closer, we find a world where elegance masked exhaustion, and where being royal often came at the cost of basic comfort and dignity.